My sister betrayed me with my groom, moments prior to our wedding. I said nothing, but delivered a surprise. Okay, so imagine this. I'm standing at my own wedding altar, in this gorgeous gown I've dreamed of since I was a little girl. My fiancé is waiting, handsome as ever. But instead of saying I do, I pull out my phone and expose his months-long affair with my own sister, right there in front of 200 guests. Yeah, you heard that right. People always underestimated me. Quiet Bryn, they called me. The responsible one, the peacekeeper. But let me tell you, there's a certain power in being underestimated. Sometimes the quietest explosion causes the most devastating damage. And that day, my wedding day, was an absolute inferno. 3 days before all this went down, everything was perfect. The estate was like a fairy tale, sprawling green lawns, a fountain catching the sun just right, and that old stone chapel where I was supposed to become Mrs. Landon Rives. My name is Bryn Caldwell, and in 72 hours, I was set to marry the love of my life. Hold still, dear. This hem isn't going to fix itself, Margaret, my seamstress, said, pins between her lips. I was having my final dress fitting. I kept glancing at my phone. My little sister, Sienna, my maid of honor, was late. Classic Sienna, always on her own schedule. Then the door burst open. Sorry, I'm late, she chirped, a whirlwind of energy and designer perfume. Traffic was insane, and then I had to stop for coffee because, well, you know me without caffeine. I smiled despite my annoyance. It's fine. You're here now. She circled me, eyes wide. Bryn, you look wow. Landon is going to lose his mind. Something about her tone, it wasn't just sisterly pride. Something else was there, a weird little twitch I couldn't quite place. But before I could analyze it, she hugged me, and that's when I caught it. A familiar scent. Are you wearing Landon's cologne? I asked, pulling back. She laughed, tossing her dark hair. Oh, that? Yeah, I borrowed it when I stopped by your place yesterday. Just as a joke, you know, to mess with him tonight. Does it freak you out? I forced a laugh. No, it's funny. He'll get a kick out of it. But it felt off, like a picture hanging slightly crooked. I chalked it up to pre-wedding nerves. The rest of the day was a blur of family arriving. My college roommate, Emily. Landon's parents, with their perfectly coordinated outfits and tight smiles. All the while, I was waiting for Landon to text. When he finally showed up, he seemed different. He hugged me, but his eyes just kept darting around the room, never quite settling on mine. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just work stuff, he said, checking his phone again. Client emergency. Nothing I can't handle. Landon was always like this with his architecture firm, dedicated to a fault. But that little voice in my head whispered, something isn't right. The rehearsal dinner was stunning. Fairy lights twinkling over the garden terrace, the air sweet with roses. I should have been completely happy. Instead, I watched Landon. He kept checking his phone under the table. His laugh seemed forced. Then came the toasts. Tasha, my best friend since college, gave this beautiful, heartfelt speech about finding someone who sees the real you. Her eyes lingered on me with a question I couldn't quite read. Then Sienna stood up, champagne flute in hand, her black dress catching the light. To my big sister and her almost husband, she began, her voice carrying across the terrace. Bryn has always been the careful one, the planner, the perfectionist. Then she turned to Landon. And Landon. She paused, her smile shifting into something more personal. Well, Landon used to like wild girls back in college, didn't you? A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd. My cheeks flushed. Landon's face went rigid. But opposites attract, Sienna continued smoothly. And I've never seen two people more perfectly mismatched in all the right ways. She raised her glass. To Bryn and Landon, may your marriage be as beautiful as this wedding we've spent way too much money on. Everyone laughed, and the moment seemed salvaged. But I watched Landon's hand jerk, spilling red wine across the white tablecloth. He muttered an apology and excused himself. I should check on him, I said, starting to rise. Tasha caught my wrist. He's a big boy. He can clean himself up. Her eyes were serious, searching mine. You know I love you, right? Of course. Just watch the body language between those two. Those two who? I asked, though I already knew. Your sister and your fiancé. Tasha's voice was low, measured. I'm not saying anything is happening. Just pay attention. I wanted to dismiss her, but Tasha was observant. Still, this was Sienna, my sister, and Landon, the man I was marrying. The idea was absurd, wasn't it? The next morning, during our pre-wedding photo shoot, I couldn't help but notice how easily Landon and Sienna fell into conversation between shots. Private jokes, whispered comments, that comfortable intimacy that comes from shared secrets. At one point, I asked Landon, can I borrow your phone? I want to show Mom that song we were thinking about for our first dance. He hesitated, just for a second. My battery's almost dead. Use yours. Mine was charging back in the room. Reluctantly, he handed me his phone. It was locked. Since when did Landon lock his phone? We'd always had an open policy. What's your code? I asked, keeping my voice light. Before he could answer, Sienna called out, Landon, photographer wants you for a groomsman shot. He took the phone back, quickly. I'll show you the song later. Just work stuff on there anyway. Boring client emails. As he walked away, a strange hollow feeling settled in my chest. Work stuff. He'd said that yesterday, too. That evening, my mother cornered me in the bridal suite. Bryn, sweetie, stop overthinking everything, Claire Caldwell said, adjusting my necklace. At 55, Mom still turned heads. Perfectly polished, rigid posture. I can practically hear your brain worrying. I'm fine, Mom. A nervous groom is just tradition, she continued, ignoring me. Your father was a wreck. Men just process differently. I nodded, not wanting to get into it. Mom lived in a world where appearances were everything. A perfect wedding meant a perfect marriage. Nothing could disrupt that narrative. As she fussed with my hair, a memory surfaced. New Year's Eve, 2 years ago. Sienna had disappeared for over an hour. When she returned, she was oddly quiet. I remembered looking for Landon to count down to midnight. Couldn't find him until the last minute. He'd claimed he was helping someone with car trouble. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Now, the memory took on an uncomfortable shape. Mom, I said slowly, have you ever noticed anything off between Landon and Sienna? Claire's hands froze in my hair. What on earth are you talking about? I don't know, just the way they act sometimes. She stepped around to face me, her expression stern. Bryn Elizabeth Caldwell, it is 3 days before your wedding. Whatever this is, anxiety, cold feet, whatever, you need to push it aside. Do you understand me? I nodded, automatically the way I always did when Mom used that tone. Good. She softened slightly. Your sister adores you, and Landon is crazy about you. Don't create problems where there aren't any. Later that night, Landon kissed me goodbye at my suite door. You're not staying? I asked. Mason and the guys want me to sleep at the groomsmen's suite tonight. You know, tradition and all that. Since when did Landon care about tradition? We'd lived together for over a year, but I didn't press it. Okay, see you tomorrow then. He kissed me again, lingering. I love you, Bryn. You know that, right? I know. I love you too. After he left, I stood in the middle of my bridal suite, surrounded by white flowers and champagne, all the trappings of impending matrimony. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my stomach. Not butterflies, but something heavier, darker. I wish I didn't always explain away the things I feel, I whispered to the empty room before crawling into bed alone. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of locked doors and whispered conversations, just out of earshot. The morning of my wedding day dawned clear and perfect. Golden light streamed through the curtains of my bridal suite, promising happiness. I woke early, feeling strangely calm. The doubts seemed distant, like a storm that had passed. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my robe, and padded barefoot down to the estate's kitchen. It was just after 6. No one would be around. I wanted a moment of quiet, a cup of coffee, peace before the chaos began. The kitchen was silent. Morning light slanted across the marble countertops. I started the coffee maker, leaned against the island, taking deep breaths. That's when I saw it. Landon's phone, sitting on the counter by the fruit bowl. He must have come down for a midnight snack and forgotten it. Unlike me, he could never sleep when he was stressed. I picked it up without thinking. The screen lit up. No passcode prompt. It was unlocked. My thumb hesitated. I'd never been the type to snoop. Trust was everything. But then I saw it. A notification preview. A text message from Sienna. My heart stuttered. Before I could talk myself out of it, I tapped the message icon. There it was, my sister's name. And beneath it, words that turned my blood to ice. Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you. She'll never know. My fingers moved of their own accord, scrolling up through the message history. Months of texts, secret meetups, inside jokes, photos I couldn't bring myself to open, location pins dropped at hotels, at parks, at places where I thought one of them had been alone. I wish you could stay longer. I hate lying to her. One more time before the wedding. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the counter to steady myself, then stumbled to the bathroom off the kitchen, locking the door behind me. Sinking to the floor, I scrolled, reading and rereading, trying to make the words mean something different than what they so clearly said. Minutes or hours, I don't know. They had been sleeping together for months. My sister, my fiancé, the two people I trusted most in the world. A knock at the door startled me. Bryn? You in there? It was Tasha. I opened the door. One look at my face told her everything. What happened? She asked, stepping inside and closing the door. Wordlessly, I handed her the phone. I watched her face as she read. Confusion, shifting to disbelief, then to a cold, controlled anger I had only seen a few times in our decade of friendship. When she finally looked up, her voice was deadly calm. Tell me what you want to do. I don't know, I whispered. My voice sounded strange, hollow, distant. I don't know what to do. Tasha placed a hand on my shoulder. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But Bryn, her eyes met mine, you can't marry him. Not now. I nodded slowly. The initial shock was wearing off, making room for something else. Something sharp, clear, and cold. I need to think. We returned to my suite the back way. I needed time to process, to plan. An hour later, as my mother's assistants bustled around with makeup kits, Sienna breezed in. Her smile was bright, her eyes clear. Not a hint of guilt. Morning bride, she sang out. How are we feeling? Nervous? Excited? Both. I watched her in the mirror as she chatted with my mother, hugged Tasha, poured herself a mimosa. How could she act so normal? How could she look me in the eye? See, I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. Can you help me with my makeup? I want to be perfect. Of course, she bounced over, eager to help, never suspecting that I knew. As she leaned in to apply foundation, I searched her face. Any sign of remorse? Any flicker of discomfort? Did you see Landon last night? I asked casually, not a pause in her brushstrokes. No. Why? Wasn't he with the guys? The lie. So smooth. My own sister, looking directly in my eyes, lying without hesitation. Just wondering, I said. He left his phone in the kitchen. Was that a slight tightening around her eyes? A momentary freeze? If so, she recovered quickly. Oh, he's always forgetting that thing. Want me to take it to him? No, I said, meeting her gaze in the mirror. I'll handle it. Throughout the morning, as hair was styled and makeup applied, as my mother fussed over details and guests arrived, I remained eerily calm. Tasha kept watching me, concerned. But I had made my decision. I'm not going to confront them, I told her when we had a moment alone. Not yet. Bryn. Let's give them their perfect day, I said, a strange smile playing on my lips. Let them think everything is going according to plan. Tasha studied my face, then nodded slowly. Okay, I trust you. What's the plan? While Sienna was busy with the photographer, I took Landon's phone. I forwarded the most damning messages to myself, took screenshots of conversations, saved them to my cloud, and then carefully deleted any trace of my digital detective work. Whatever happened next, I wanted proof. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in my suite. My wedding dress hung like a ghost in the corner. By the light of a single lamp, I rewrote my vows into something else entirely, a speech that would change everything. If I speak now, I know I'll never be the same again, I whispered to myself, folding the paper and tucking it into my clutch. And that's okay. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt something other than shock or numbness. I felt powerful. Tomorrow wouldn't go as planned, but it would go exactly as it should. The wedding day unfolded like a beautiful dream, or it would have if I hadn't been wide awake to the nightmare underneath. My wedding gown, an off-the-shoulder creation of lace and silk, felt different now. Not the garment of joy, but armor for the battle ahead. You look radiant, my mother said, adjusting my veil with tears in her eyes. Absolutely perfect. I smiled softly, meeting her gaze. Thank you, Mom. If she noticed anything strange in my demeanor, she didn't mention it. Claire Caldwell had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of not seeing what didn't fit her narrative. Sienna fluttered around me, straightening my train, handing me my bouquet of white peonies and roses. Every touch of her hands felt like a betrayal now, every smile a lie. I watched her in the mirror as she dabbed at her eyes. I can't believe my big sister is getting married, she said, voice thick with emotion. Was it guilt? Regret? Or just the performance of the beautiful maid of honor? Believe it, I replied, my voice steady. The bridal party lined up at the chapel entrance. Through the old wooden doors, I could hear the string quartet, the murmur of 200 guests. My father appeared at my side, handsome in his tuxedo, offering his arm. Ready, sweetheart? He asked. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The doors opened. The music swelled. One by one, the bridesmaids processed down the aisle. Tasha went last, turning at the altar to catch my eye. The slight nod she gave me was nearly imperceptible, but it steadied me. Whatever happened next, I wasn't alone. Then it was my turn. My father and I stepped into the doorway, and everyone rose. I saw faces turn toward me, smiling, expectant, emotional. And at the end of the aisle, Landon waited. Handsome in his black tuxedo, his expression a mixture of nerves and something that might have been love if I didn't know better. Each step down the aisle felt deliberate, like I was walking not toward my future, but toward the truth. I smiled softly, my eyes never leaving Landon's face. Did he see it? The knowledge in my eyes? The steel beneath my smile? If he did, he gave no sign. When we reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Landon's. His fingers were warm, slightly trembling. I squeezed them gently, watching his face, wondering how I could have missed the lies before. Pastor Monroe, who had known me since childhood, stepped forward with a warm smile. Dearly beloved, he began, his rich voice filling the chapel. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Bryn Elizabeth Caldwell and Landon James Rives in holy matrimony. I let his words wash over me, looking out at the sea of faces, my mother in the front row, dabbing at her eyes, Mr. Rives beside her, stoic as always, and Sienna, standing opposite Landon, clutching her bouquet, her eyes darting between us. Pastor Monroe spoke of love and commitment, of honesty and trust. Each word felt like a dagger, highlighting the gap between what should have been and what was. I listened, smiling at the appropriate moments, squeezing Landon's hand when the pastor spoke of weathering life's storms together. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, Pastor Monroe continued, but reverently and soberly. Landon glanced at me, a small, reassuring smile on his lips. I returned it, thinking of the text messages on his phone. Last night was perfect. She'll never know. If anyone can show just cause why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause. The chapel was silent, except for the soft rustle of programs and the distant call of birds. No one spoke. Of course they didn't. Landon and Bryn have written their own vows, Pastor Monroe said, turning first to Landon. Landon, would you like to begin? Landon cleared his throat, pulled a folded paper from his pocket, and began to read. His voice was steady, confident. The voice of a man who thought his secrets were safe. Bryn, from the moment we met, I knew you were special. Your kindness, your intelligence, your beauty, inside and out, captivated me. I promised to be faithful and true. Each word a beautiful lie. I listened, nodding, tears filling my eyes, not from emotion, but from the sheer audacity of his performance. When he finished, there was a collective awe from the guests. And now, Bryn, Pastor Monroe said, turning to me, do you take Landon James Rives to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? This was it. The moment everything changed. I looked into Landon's eyes, my expression serene. Then I raised my hand slowly, stopping the pastor. Before I say I do, I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying to the back of the chapel, I'd like to read something aloud. A murmur rippled through the guests. Pastor Monroe blinked in surprise, but nodded. Of course. I reached into the small pocket sewn into my dress and pulled out my phone. Landon's eyes widened slightly, confusion crossing his features. Bryn, he whispered, what are you doing? I smiled at him, then turned to face our guests. I'd like to share some messages I found this morning, I said, my voice unwavering. Messages between my fiancé and my maid of honor. My sister. The murmurs grew louder. My mother half rose from her seat, her face stricken. Bryn, what on earth? I raised my hand again, silencing her with a look. Then I began to read, my voice clear and emotionless. Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you. She'll never know. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I wish you didn't have to go back to her room. One more time before the wedding. I hate that I have to watch you marry her. Gasps echoed through the chapel. Sienna's face had drained of all color, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Landon stepped toward me, reaching for the phone. Bryn, please. I stepped back, out of his reach. There's more. Months of messages, secret meetings, hotel rooms. I scrolled through the phone. Plans made while I was planning our wedding. Lies told to my face by the two people I trusted most. The chapel had gone completely silent now. The kind of silence that feels like a physical weight. I could feel every eye on me, hear every held breath. And the person who sent these, I said, my voice finally cracking slightly, is my maid of honor. My sister. I turned to look at Sienna, whose face had crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. She took a step toward me, mouth opening to speak. Bryn, a single gasp broke the silence, followed by the sound of someone standing abruptly, their chair scraping against the stone floor. Then more murmurs, growing louder, filling the chapel with the sound of shock and scandal. I stood there, phone in hand, my wedding dress suddenly feeling too tight, too heavy. But my spine was straight, my head held high. In that moment, surrounded by whispers and stares, I had never felt more alone or more free. The truth was out. There was no going back now. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people holding their breath. Then, like a dam breaking, the whispers began. They started at the back, rushing forward in a wave of shocked murmurs and gasps. I stood perfectly still. My hands didn't shake. My voice hadn't cracked. I had done what I came to do. "Now you all know," I said calmly, lowering the phone to my side. Pastor Monroe cleared his throat, his Bible half closed. He looked between Landon and me, then at Sienna, clearly at a loss. In all his years, he'd never encountered anything like this. Landon was the first to move. He stepped toward me, his face ashen, reaching for my hands. "Bryn, I can explain," he said, his voice breaking. The charm that had won me over 3 years ago was nowhere to be found. In its place was naked panic. "Please, you already did." I cut him off, my voice soft but firm. "By a text." His face crumpled. Behind him, I could see his groomsmen exchanging uncomfortable glances, shifting their weight, unsure whether to stay or leave. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sienna trying to make her way toward one of the side exits. Tasha, bless her, moved with surprising speed in her bridesmaid's dress, stepping smoothly to block her path. My sister froze, her bouquet clutched so tightly that a few petals drifted to the floor. "See," I called, my voice carrying over the growing murmurs. "Don't you have anything to say?" She turned slowly to face me, mascara already streaking down her flushed cheeks. For a moment, I thought she might deny everything. Instead, she broke down in heaving sobs. "It was a mistake," she cried, her voice high and strained. "I was drunk most of the time. It didn't mean anything." I tilted my head slightly, studying her with a detachment that surprised even me. "Then it shouldn't cost you anything to admit it, should it?" The whispers grew louder. Someone in the back stood up to leave, then another and another. The perfect wedding was unraveling, thread by thread. My mother appeared at my side, her face a rigid mask of composure, even as her eyes flashed with panic. She grabbed my elbow with fingers like steel. "Bryn Elizabeth, what are you doing?" she hissed, too low for the front row to hear. "We have 200 guests here. The governor's wife is in the 3rd row. The Andersons donated $50,000 to your father's campaign last year. This can be handled privately later." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. Claire Caldwell, the woman who had taught me to smile through discomfort, to maintain appearances at all costs, the architect of my perfect manners and my perfect wedding, and if she had her way, my perfectly hollow marriage. "You raised us to smile through betrayal," I said quietly. "I'm choosing not to." Before she could respond, Pastor Monroe gently closed his Bible with an air of finality. His kind eyes met mine with unexpected understanding. "I believe this wedding ceremony is postponed," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the back rows. Without another word, he stepped away from the altar and walked down the side aisle toward the back door. That was the cue the guests needed. They began to stand, gathering purses and programs, whispering urgently to each other. Some looked at me with pity, others with fascination, a few with something like respect. None of them knew what to say, so most said nothing at all, filing out of the pews in uncomfortable silence. As the chapel emptied, I remained standing at the altar, Landon a few feet away, both of us stranded on an island of shattered promises. Sienna had collapsed into one of the front pews, sobbing quietly. Tasha stood guard beside her, arms crossed. Mr. Rives, Landon's father, approached the altar with measured steps. His face was like granite, jaw clenched so tightly I could see a muscle twitching in his cheek. I braced myself for anger, for blame. But when he spoke, it wasn't to me. "You brought shame to our family name," he said to his son, voice low and controlled. Then he turned on his heel and walked out without a backward glance. My mother, meanwhile, had recovered enough to go into damage control mode. She marched over to Sienna, grabbing her wrist. "Get in the car now," she ordered, pulling my sister to her feet. C stumbled after her, still crying, not daring to look at me as they passed. As the last of the guests filtered out, leaving only the wedding party and a few stunned vendors behind, Tasha approached me. She gently touched my shoulder, her eyes full of fierce pride. "You didn't just take your power back," she said softly. "You lit the whole damn house on fire." A startled laugh escaped me, the first genuine sound I had made all day. Tasha squeezed my shoulder, and in that moment I knew I would be okay. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The chapel was nearly empty now. The string quartet had packed up mid-song. The florist was awkwardly waiting by the door, clearly unsure if she should start removing the arrangements. The only sound was the distant closing of car doors as guests fled the scene of what would surely become the most talked-about non-wedding in county history. I started toward the door myself, ready to escape to somewhere quiet, where I could finally process everything. But Landon followed, trailing after me down the aisle like a shadow. "Bryn, please," he called, his voice echoing in the nearly empty chapel. "At least let me explain." I paused, but didn't turn around. "I never planned for any of this to happen," he continued, closing the distance between us. "It just happened. I was confused. But I love you. I've always loved you." Now I did turn, facing him with clear eyes. "Then why did you keep choosing her?" The question hung between us, simple and devastating. Landon opened his mouth, closed it again. For once in his charmed life, he had no smooth answer ready. I slipped the engagement ring from my finger, the 3-carat diamond that had felt so heavy these past few months. Taking his hand, I placed the ring in his palm and closed his fingers around it. "You don't get to hurt me and still have me," I said, my voice steady despite the tightness in my throat. Then I walked away, out through the chapel doors and into the bright afternoon sunlight. My wedding dress dragged slightly on the stone path as I made my way to the fountain at the center of the estate's grounds. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to be alone. The fountain burbled peacefully, water cascading over carved stone angels, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. I sat on its edge, not caring if the water spotted my dress. What did it matter now? For the first time all day, I was truly alone. No mother hovering, no sister betraying, no fiancé lying. Just me and the quiet splash of water against stone. I expected tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. "You were never my home," I whispered to myself, to Landon, to the life I had thought I wanted. Just the hallway I had to pass through. A new strength settled into my bones as I sat there, my wedding dress pulled around me like shed skin, ready to walk into whatever came next. The apartment felt different when I returned 3 days later. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Wedding planning binders stacked on the coffee table, framed photos of Landon and me on the mantel. His jacket still hung over the dining room chair. And yet, the space felt alien, like I'd stepped into a museum exhibit of someone else's life. I stood in the center of the living room, my suitcase still by the door. Tasha had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. With deliberate movements, I began taking down the photos, carefully one by one. I didn't throw them, didn't tear them in half like someone in a movie might. I simply removed them, stacking them face down on the table. Next came the planning binders, filled with swatches and contracts and guest lists. I closed each one without looking inside and placed them in a box. The Mrs. Rives coffee mug, a gift from a well-meaning coworker. The weekend bags we'd bought for our honeymoon to Bali. Each item went into boxes. One for donation, one for storage, one for trash. I worked methodically for hours, dismantling the evidence of our relationship piece by piece. By evening, the apartment looked strangely bare, but it felt like mine again. My phone had been off since the wedding day. I wasn't ready to face the barrage of texts and calls that would surely be waiting. But on the fourth day, sitting in my half-empty apartment with a glass of wine, I finally turned it on. The notifications flooded in immediately. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of texts, emails, social media alerts. I ignored most of them, scanning quickly for the names that mattered. Tasha had texted daily, checking on you. Here, when you need me, just say the word and I'll bring wine and ice cream. My mother, call me immediately. We need to discuss damage control. The Rives are threatening to sue for emotional distress. Various friends and relatives, ranging from concerned to morbidly curious. And there, near the bottom of the list, Sienna, just one text, sent yesterday. Please talk to me. I set the phone down without replying to anyone. I wasn't ready yet. 2 more days passed. I returned to work at the art gallery, grateful for the distraction of organizing the new exhibition. My colleagues were kind but careful around me, clearly uncertain how to address what had happened. I appreciated their restraint. When I returned home that evening, a letter was waiting in my mailbox. Not an email or a text. An actual handwritten letter on cream stationery in Sienna's looping handwriting. I almost threw it away unopened, but something stopped me. The same instinct that had made me read those text messages on Landon's phone. I needed to know the truth. All of it, no matter how much it hurt. Inside the apartment, I fixed myself a cup of tea before sitting down at the kitchen table to read my sister's letter. Bryn, it began. I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. What I did is unforgivable. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I think you deserve the truth. The whole truth, not just the bits you saw in those texts. I took a deep breath and continued reading. It wasn't just that night before the wedding. It started over a year ago at Mom and Dad's anniversary party. You were busy helping the caterers and Landon, and I ended up talking on the back porch for hours. Nothing happened that night, but something changed. We started texting, just friendly at first. The letter continued, detailing moments I had missed. A weekend I was sick with the flu, and Sienna had stopped by to check on me while I was asleep. Coffee meetings that happened while I was at work. A work trip of Landon's that Sienna had secretly joined. I know this doesn't matter, the letter went on, but I need to tell you why. All my life I felt like the lesser daughter. You were the perfect one. Smart, kind, successful. I was the screw-up, the wild child, the disappointment. Mom made that clear every chance she got. I paused, remembering all the times our mother had compared us, always holding me up as the example Sienna should follow. It had made me uncomfortable, even then. When Landon paid attention to me, really saw me, it was like a drug. For once, I had something you didn't. Someone chose me first. It was selfish and horrible, and I hate myself for it. But that's the truth. I was broken long before I broke your trust. The letter went on for pages, a full confession that left nothing unsaid. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face, not just for my own pain, but for the toxic dynamic that had poisoned our sisterhood long before Landon entered the picture. It didn't excuse what they had done. Nothing could, but it helped me understand. And understanding was the first step toward my own healing. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't planned to, but after reading Sienna's letter, I needed to face my mother. Not to forgive, not yet, but to question. Claire answered the door in a perfectly pressed blouse and slacks, her hair freshly styled despite it being barely 9 a.m. Her eyes widened at the sight of me. Bryn, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you for days. She opened the door wider. Come in quickly. Mrs. Henderson across the street has been watching for gossip since the incident. I followed her inside to the immaculate living room, where nothing was ever out of place, including our emotions. You embarrassed this entire family, she began before I could even sit down. Do you have any idea? Why did you always pit us against each other? I interrupted, my voice calm. She blinked, caught off guard. What are you talking about? Sienna and me. You always compared us, always made it clear that I was the good one, and she was the disappointment. Why? My mother's face hardened. That's ridiculous. I simply encouraged her to follow your excellent example. No, I said, shaking my head. You made us competitors instead of allies. You turned sisterhood into a contest. This is hardly relevant to your wedding disaster, she deflected, moving to straighten an already perfectly aligned throw pillow. It's completely relevant. Sienna slept with Landon because he made her feel seen when her own family, especially you, only saw her flaws. Claire's hand froze on the pillow. For a moment, her perfect mask slipped, revealing something vulnerable underneath. I only wanted what was best for both of you, she said, her voice smaller. By making us fight for your approval? By teaching us that our value was in how well we performed. I took a step toward her. What kind of lesson was that, Mom? She sank onto the couch, suddenly looking older than her 55 years. I didn't know another way, she admitted after a long silence. My mother was the same with my sister and me. This was new information. My mother rarely spoke about her childhood or her relationship with Aunt Rebecca, who lived on the other side of the country and visited only for major holidays. What happened between you? I asked, sitting beside her. Claire stared at her perfectly manicured hands. We competed for everything. Our parents' attention, the same scholarships, eventually the same man. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Your father, Dad, dated Aunt Rebecca? This was something I had never known. She nodded briefly. In college, before he met me. When we started dating, she never forgave me. Said I stole him. A bitter smile crossed her lips. The irony is, years later, I found out he'd had an affair with my cousin Jennifer. I forgave him, but I never trusted any woman around him again. She reached for a tissue. I thought hiding pain made me stronger. I sat in stunned silence. My perfect parents, my father's affair, my mother's buried pain. It was like looking at a familiar painting and suddenly seeing an entirely different image. Why didn't you ever tell us? What good would it have done? She asked. Some things are better left in the past. Are they? I challenged gently. Look what secrets did to our family. She had no answer for that. Later that week, scrolling through social media for the first time since the wedding, I came across a post from Landon. A carefully crafted public apology, no doubt vetted by his firm's PR team. To those I've hurt with my actions, I offer my sincere apology. I never meant to cause pain to anyone, especially those closest to me. I take full responsibility for my choices and am committed to becoming a better person through this difficult learning experience. Generic. Sanitized. Landon Light. I closed the app after reading the first few lines, uninterested in his public performance of remorse. The comment section below was divided. Some blamed him entirely. Others pointed fingers at Sienna, calling her the typical homewrecker. A few even suggested I should have handled it privately instead of causing a scene. I didn't care what strangers thought. They hadn't walked in my white satin heels. What surprised me was the visitor who showed up at the gallery the following Tuesday afternoon. There's a Mr. Rives here to see you, Sarah the receptionist said, her eyes wide with curiosity. Not the younger one. His father. I set down my clipboard, straightening my blazer. Show him in, please. Thomas Rives entered the small office with the same commanding presence he had always had. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than a month of my rent. Unlike his son, he had never been particularly warm toward me. Respectful, yes, but distant. Miss Caldwell, he said with a slight nod. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Rives, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. This is unexpected. He sat, adjusting his sleeves. I'll be brief. I came to apologize. Of all the things I had expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. Apologize? Not for my son's behavior. Landon is responsible for his own actions. His jaw tightened. I'm apologizing for my part in enabling the type of man he became, a man who would betray the trust of someone like you. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I was not, he paused, searching for words. An emotionally available father was clearly unfamiliar territory. I taught Landon about success, about appearance, about getting what he wanted. I never taught him about honor or consequence. He met my eyes directly. You deserved better. I've never said that before to anyone. The admission seemed to cost this proud man something. I found myself nodding slowly. Thank you for telling me that. He stood to leave, our brief conversation apparently complete. At the door, he turned back. If it's any consolation, his mother has removed him from her will, and I've made it clear he's not welcome at the firm's holiday party this year. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. We Ribes may not show emotion well, but we do have our ways of expressing disapproval. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, turning our conversation over in my mind. It wasn't the closure I had expected, but it was something. An acknowledgement that what had happened to me mattered, that I wasn't the one at fault. That weekend, Tasha showed up at my door with a bottle of wine in one hand and mini golf putters in the other. Get dressed, she announced. We're going out. Mini golf? Really? I couldn't help but smile. We hadn't played since college. Yes, mini golf. Because it's impossible to be sad while trying to hit a ball through a windmill. She was right. For 3 hours, we played the ridiculous course, laughing at our terrible shots, cheering our rare successes, and allowing ourselves to be fully present in the moment. Afterward, we sat at a nearby wine bar, slightly buzzed and more relaxed than I had felt in weeks. You know what I realized today? Tasha said, swirling her Merlot. You laughed. Like really laughed. I considered this. I did, didn't I? You're not broken, Bryn, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You're just finally free. That night, back in my apartment, I found myself drawn to the bookshelf where I had stored my old art supplies. Behind the novels and reference books was my sketchbook, the one I had abandoned months ago when wedding planning took over my life. I pulled it out, along with a box of charcoals. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, I opened to a blank page and began to draw. Not flowers or cake designs or seating charts, but bold, abstract pieces filled with fire and movement. My hand moved almost of its own accord, creating shapes that spoke of pain and release and rebirth. By morning, my fingers were black with charcoal, and the sketchbook held the beginning of something new. Something that was entirely mine. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, I received an email that changed everything again. Dear Miss Caldwell, I recently attended your gallery's exhibition on emerging artists and was particularly struck by the charcoal series you curated in the East Wing. During our conversation, you mentioned some of your own work. I'd like to discuss the possibility of including your pieces in our upcoming Phoenix Rising showcase of new voices in the art world. It was from Marcus Ling, director of the Westfield Gallery, a small but prestigious space known for launching careers. I read the email 3 times, sure it was some kind of mistake. I had mentioned my recent return to art during a brief conversation at the exhibition opening, but never expected him to remember, let alone express interest. My work was raw, personal, not something I had ever considered showing publicly. My finger hovered over the delete button. Then I thought of what Tasha would say. Are you crazy? Reply right now before he changes his mind. I typed a response, professional but enthusiastic, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the center of the Westfield Gallery, watching as my pieces, now properly framed and mounted, were installed on the gleaming white walls. There were 7 in total, a series I titled Fracture and Flight, abstract works that chronicled my journey from betrayal to freedom. This one needs to be the centerpiece, Marcus said, pointing to the largest canvas, a swirl of reds and golds, charcoal lines cutting through like lightning strikes. The gallery's placard beside it read, The Altar by Bryn Caldwell. And beneath that, The Moment You Speak Your Truth in a Room Designed to Silence You. The exhibition opening was scheduled for Friday evening. I spent the day alternating between excitement and terror, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a simple black dress with a single statement necklace, a silver phoenix pendant Tasha had given me as an early congratulations gift. The gallery filled quickly with art critics, collectors, and curious locals who had read about the exhibition in the weekly culture section. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, answering questions about my technique, accepting both compliments and critiques with as much grace as I could muster. It was during a rare, quiet moment, standing alone by the refreshment table, that I spotted her, Sienna, hovering near the entrance, uncertain. She looked different, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face wearing less makeup than I had seen her wear since high school. When our eyes met across the room, she froze. For a moment, I considered ignoring her, turning away to speak with anyone else. Instead, I watched as she gathered her courage and made her way through the crowd toward my artwork. She stood before the altar for a long time, her posture stiff, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I found myself moving toward her, drawn by some force I couldn't name. When I stopped beside her, neither of us spoke immediately. We stood side by side, looking at the canvas that represented the moment our relationship had shattered. "It's powerful," Sienna finally said, her voice quiet. "I feel it in my chest." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. She turned to face me, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know I lost you," she said, the words rushing out as if she had rehearsed them but couldn't quite remember the order. "But I hope someday I earn back the right to call you my sister." The gallery buzzed around us, voices and laughter creating a cocoon of white noise. I studied my sister's face, the face I had known all my life, the face that had lied to me, the face that now showed genuine remorse. "Forgiveness isn't the same as reunion," I said finally, the words coming from somewhere deep and true within me. "I'm not there yet, but thank you for finally seeing me." Something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. I opened my arms and she stepped into them. Our hug was brief, almost formal, but it was a beginning. As she pulled away, wiping at her eyes, a man approached from the other side of the gallery, tall, with kind eyes and an air of quiet confidence. "Excuse me," he said. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to tell you how moved I was by your work." He extended his hand. "Elliot Barnes. I write for Art Forum." "Bryn Caldwell," I replied, shaking his hand. Sienna took the opportunity to slip away, giving me a small nod as she disappeared into the crowd. "That piece," Elliot said, gesturing to the altar, was bold. "I've never seen pain and power coexist so beautifully on canvas." I felt a small smile form. "Thank you." "So are you," he added, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "Bold, I mean." There was a softness to our exchange, a tentative interest that caught me by surprise. For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of something that wasn't anger or sadness. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was open, possible. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, I noticed another unexpected visitor. My mother stood at the back of the gallery, elegant as always in a tailored navy dress. She hadn't approached me all evening, but I had felt her presence, sensed her watching. After the last guests left, she finally came forward, a bouquet of white peonies, my favorites, in her arms. "These are for you," she said, holding them out like an offering. "Your work is remarkable. You're more than I ever allowed myself to believe." Coming from Claire Caldwell, this was the equivalent of a lengthy, emotional speech. I accepted the flowers with a nod of thanks. "Will you be at Sunday dinner this week?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I need more time." She nodded, disappointment visible, but acceptance there, too. "The invitation stands whenever you're ready." We were learning, all of us, how to navigate this new landscape where secrets had been exposed, where old patterns were recognized, if not yet broken. It wasn't easy and it wasn't pretty, but it was real. A week after the exhibition, a package arrived at my apartment. The return address was Landon's. For a moment, I considered sending it back unopened. Curiosity won out. Inside was a USB drive containing the digital wedding album. All the photos taken before the ceremony, carefully edited and assembled into what would have been our keepsake. No note, no explanation. Just the images of a day that had ended very differently than these smiling photos suggested. That evening, I built a small fire in the outdoor fire pit of my apartment complex. Alone under the stars, I placed the USB drive on the flames and watched as the plastic melted, the circuits within turning black. As the smoke rose into the night sky, I felt the last threads of my old life burning away. The next morning, I met Tasha for coffee at our favorite cafe. Her eyes widened when I told her about burning the wedding album. "Dramatic," she said with approval. "So, what's next for the artist formerly known as Almost Mrs. Rives?" I laughed, stirring my latte. "Actually, I've been thinking about something. Your podcast idea. The Runaway Bride Diaries." Tasha sat up straighter. "You're serious?" "Not exactly that name," I clarified, "but something about rebuilding after betrayal. Not just romantic betrayal, all kinds. Family, friends, self-betrayal." I shrugged. People need to hear they're not alone. Tasha's face lit up. "We could interview people who've been through similar experiences, experts on healing, artists like you who transform their pain." She was already pulling out her phone, making notes. This could be huge. I smiled, watching my best friend's enthusiasm. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting here planning a future that had nothing to do with Landon or wedding centerpieces or fitting into someone else's idea of perfection. That evening, alone in my apartment, I found myself drawn to the chapel where the wedding was supposed to have happened. I hadn't been back since that day, but something pulled me there. Some need for closure I hadn't realized I still carried. The estate was quiet at sunset, the grounds empty of visitors. The caretaker recognized me, and after a moment of awkward sympathy, unlocked the chapel door and left me to my thoughts. I walked down the aisle alone, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The flowers were long gone, the pews bare of decorations. It was just a room now, beautiful, but stripped of the meaning I had once assigned to it. Standing at the altar where my life had changed, I pulled out my phone and set it on a nearby ledge, camera facing me. I pressed record. 3 months ago, I stood in this exact spot and chose truth over comfort. I began, my voice steady. I chose myself over the fantasy I had been sold about love and marriage and happy endings. I looked directly into the camera, speaking not just to myself, but to anyone who might someday hear these words. I thought the worst thing that could happen was getting left at the altar. Turns out, the worst thing was almost marrying someone who never truly saw me. And the best thing, I smiled, feeling the truth of my words as I spoke them, was walking away. The chapel was silent around me, holding my words like a witness. This time, I take a vow to never betray myself again. That's the only I do I'll ever need. I ended the recording and stood for a moment longer in the quiet chapel. Then I walked back down the aisle and out into the evening air, leaving behind the ghosts of what might have been. Later that night, after much consideration, I uploaded the video to my private social media account, not for views or validation, but as a marker of how far I had come, a line in the sand between my past and my future. As I pressed post, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from heartbreak to healing, from silence to voice, from the woman who had almost married Landon to the woman I was becoming. The road hadn't been straight or easy, but it had led me here, to this moment of quiet strength. To never betraying myself again, I whispered, raising an imaginary glass to my reflection in the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars.